Christian journey to get to the place where we are now in our understanding of that faith is not over. There is no generation that can say, we got it. We're done now. All our holy books, we understand. We continue in every generation to engage our faith traditions and learn something more about them and about ourselves. And even if we're very careful, we may get a glimmer of insight into the nature of God. This isn't easy work because it's very, very tempting on that journey of following God to get bored, to get in dismay because the journey is hard, to become confused, and finally to simply say, I don't know that I like this God, and I'm going to do something else. All of those things and more can happen to us. And guess what? They're all a part of faith. As long as we are engaging the journey, even when we have a moment where we are completely angry with our God, even then, or even if we question it's even there, we are engaged in a journey of faith. It is only the people who never think about it at all who may not be actively on that journey, but are they still beloved of God? Yes. Thank you. Their Creator made them too. But it becomes incumbent upon us as people who carry a particular understanding of a faith tradition to do the task of looking at its own growth and maturity and where we still need to go. When we hear that Old Testament reading that we heard, we have Moses has gone off up into the mountain again to commune with God, and the people are left to their own devices. And they do that first thing I mentioned, they're bored. And they're also not very happy with the journey that they're on. They're not happy with this God, who even though they've come out of Egypt, they haven't been fed particularly well. It's a hard journey. They're uncomfortable in that journey. There's lots of infighting among the group that's making the journey. Sound familiar? So they are at a point now where Moses says, I'm going to go and kind of have a conversation again with God to see about this next step that's taking a long time for us, over years, to get to this promised land. And they make this little golden calf out of that. Now, the problem is that up on this mountaintop, there's this conversation still happening with Moses and God, apparently, and we get this understanding from this Old Testament reading that the God that Moses is having a conversation with is what? Angry. Angry. This God, and his understanding of this kind of God at that time, was if we don't stay on the journey like we're supposed to, lots of bad things will happen to us because God will be angry. Now, reverse that. Bad things were happening to them already. Why were they thinking that was true? Because God was angry. They already projected that into the story that then becomes a story of faith. And they're struggling with that because here's Moses, then their intercessor, saying, oh God, remember that you love your people. This God who never forgets anybody's name. Remember that you love your people. Because people also have another experience of God. Even in the midst of their deprivation, they're experiencing a God who continues to give them some aspects of hope from time to time. Who actually, in the midst of a journey of life that can be very complicated, there are moments of grace. And so they're actually also having an experience of God that is merciful. And because they're still even alive, at the same point that they say, why is this happening to us? It must be because God's angry. They're also saying, but why are these good things happening to us? How the heck did we get out of Egypt? It must be because God is merciful. So the human community is trying very hard to understand the nature of God and the relationship with that God, because our identity as humanity is intimately wrapped up in what we think about God. Our identity is entwined with the identity we give God and our understanding of our relationship with that God. So then enter stage left, Jesus of Nazareth, who comes into a scene in which his people have created a tradition, and he comes from this tradition that is very much bound up in a purity code of the chosen people. That only a certain type of person following the specific kinds of laws, keeping specific codes of behavior, only those people and nobody else are the chosen of God in that tradition. And Jesus, along with many other kinds of folks at his time, began to challenge some of that. Specifically, he's challenging it because it had become, over time, and the influence of the Roman Empire, a corrupted system in which the elite religious became bound up with the elite nobility of the Roman Empire and were in collusion. Not all the people, but the elites had become in collusion with the oppression of the people. And he's challenging that understanding of God. And through his teachings, we get a sense that God is much more generous than had been the previous belief. And in fact, Jesus is showing that by how he eats with anybody. His table is a table of tremendous generosity. He will eat with the elites, and he will eat with the street people. He will eat with women. He will eat with Pharisees. He will eat with tax collectors. He will have a sit-down, getting-to-know-you meal with anyone willing to do that. Because it was a symbol for the ways in which he was willing to break down the social barriers. Because among the codes of the elite, both Roman in its stratified society and the Hebrew with its purity code, both systems were very clear about who you should not eat with, and it kept people in their strata, isolated from one another. In a belief system that said, if life is hard for you, it must be because God hates you. And if life is good for you, it must be good to do because God loves you. And Jesus challenges that understanding in every way possible. So now we get this gospel reading. This gospel reading has caused fits for any pastor who's ever tried to preach about it. Why? Because it does this thing one more time, one more flavor of an angry, enraged God saying to people, there are some chosen and there's some not. But here's the social context of how Matthew even writes it. Because, folks, we can be divinely inspired and we are human. And again, we will project onto God the things that are in our heart, which is why it makes it so important what we carry in our heart. Because Matthew is no different. He's in a horrific situation with this community as it is becoming challenged one more time by a conservative elite system that is basically willing to perpetrate horrendous violence on people who are trying to follow this other way of being, a way of being that deconstructs all the things that make the elite elite. And they're not happy about that. In a persecuted community, he has seen his own people be horrifically treated, and he is the one who is enraged. So the way that he tells this parable, he makes it a wedding banquet because that's a big symbol in the early Christian community of the new way of understanding our relationship with God as an intimate love feast. like a wedding banquet, an agape. So he pulls that in so people begin to think, oh, this is about Jesus. This is a Jesus teaching. And he brings in some other symbols as well, so he will make his point. His favorite line that he uses repeatedly in Matthew is being cast into the outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's his bumper sticker. But there are other versions of this same parable that show us for sure that this way that this is phrased is particularly Matthew's agenda. But do not hear me say that he is a bad person and that there is not truth in the scripture. What is true is transcendent to Matthew. What is true is that it is human nature to do exactly what he's done. But here's another version of the same parable, and it's in Luke. Luke 14:15. Then Jesus said to him, someone gave a great dinner and invited many. No wedding feast. Not a king. Someone had a great dinner and invited many. At the time for the dinner, he sent a slave to say to those who had been invited, come, for everything is ready now. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, quite specifically, I have bought a piece of land, and I must go out and see it. Please accept my regrets. Another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I am going to try them out. Please accept my regrets. Another said, I have just been married, and therefore I cannot come. So the slave returned and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and said to his slave, go out at once into the streets and lanes of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. And the slave said, sir, what you have ordered has been done, and there is still room. Then the master said to the slave, go out into the roads and lanes and compel people to come, so that my house might be filled. For I tell you, none of those who were invited will taste my dinner. The Gospel of Thomas translates that last line differently, because you notice how there's a landowner, and there's an oxen guy, and there's a married guy. The last line in the Gospel of Thomas in the same story is, Jesus says, tradesmen and the wealthy will not be able to. People who are in trade or about business, who are too focused on the things of the world, on building up human empire, they're going to miss out. Because I have all of this that I'm getting freely. You don't have to worry about those things. Just come and eat with me. Because my table is open to all. And find them specifically who are poor, who are without hope, and bring them to my table. Because this table is open especially for them. And then we have this letter that Paul writes to the community in Philippi. The community in Philippi has encountered tremendous oppression, and they've had to justify their existence on a daily basis. They are terrified at the persecution that's going on. They know that they could die at any time, and they are looking to Paul, who could die at any time, and saying, how should we even behave, and what is God doing? Their temptation is to want to do back to those who are doing to them, to return violence for violence. And Paul says these amazing things to people who are oppressed and endangered and in fear. Rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Jesus Christ. Finally, beloved, wherever is true, wherever and whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence and if there's anything worthy of praise, think of those things. Think about your blessings. Think about the little stuff, your cat on your lap, your loved ones next to you, the gift of music, being together. You have enough on your table. Be glad and rejoice. Keep on doing these things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, says this man whose life is in peril. And the peace, God of peace, will be with you. In our lives today, in our world today, it is so easy to not do this. All it takes is flicking on the news and seeing the wars around the world, genuine threats to humanity in terms of our peace and our ability to live with one another in all our diversity, and to celebrate that diversity. Huge, huge things going on. Ebola out there, various kinds of things threatening our economies and our sense of self. And the question raises up, where is God? And then I get a letter in the mail this past week from someone who says to me, Pastor, you should warn your flock that all these things are a sign that Jesus is coming. And boy, is he pissed. Because guess what? He's just going to select a few. And the rest of you are going to hell. And I wrote back, and I said many things that were gently said. But I most importantly said, when Christ comes, there will already be peace. He will come in peace because we have made it. We must do as St. Paul exhorts us, and no one else, but to rejoice. Do not let yourself despair ever. Believe in the value of the journey.